It was just another quiet night in the living room, the kind that usually passed without leaving any mark. I had settled into my favorite corner of the couch, the one molded perfectly to my shape after years of use. A soft blanket rested over my legs, and the faint glow of the TV filled the room with a calm, flickering light. I had put on a show, something on Netflix, one of those mystery series I often turned to when I wanted to escape for a while. But truthfully, I wasn't really watching it. It had been one of those days where nothing particularly bad happened, yet a strange heaviness lingered. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel peaceful, just empty. Ever since my son moved out, the house had felt bigger than it actually was. Too many rooms, too much silence. Too many moments where I caught myself listening for sounds that never came. I told myself I'd get used to it. I hadn't. The episode played on, characters talking, secrets unraveling, dramatic music swelling, but none of it really reached me. I was there, but not really present, just letting time pass. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Soft at first, then clearer, coming from the stairs. My heart skipped, not out of fear, but surprise. I hadn't expected anyone. I turned my head just as he appeared. Ben. He stood quietly in the doorway, leaning slightly against the frame like he wasn't sure whether to step in or turn back. For a moment, neither of us said anything. I just looked at him, taking in the details I hadn't realized I'd been missing. He looked older, not in a sudden way, but in the subtle shifts, his posture, the tiredness in his eyes, the scruffy beard he'd started keeping. But beneath all of that, there was still something familiar, something that hadn't changed. He was still my son. Mind if I join you? He asked finally, his voice calm but carrying a slight hesitation. I smiled instantly, setting the remote aside. Of course, I said. Come sit. He stepped in and dropped onto the couch beside me, pulling one leg up as he leaned into the corner. It felt strange seeing him there again like this, familiar, but also distant, like a memory stepping back into the present. We didn't speak much after that. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable, though. It was the kind that didn't need to be filled. The TV continued playing, casting moving shadows across the walls, but neither of us was fully focused on it anymore. I could feel his presence beside me, and something else, something unspoken. After a while, I glanced over at him. His eyes were fixed on the screen, but his expression was different, tense, thoughtful, like his mind was somewhere else entirely. You okay? I asked softly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he let out a slow breath, reached forward, and placed the remote on the coffee table. His fingers lingered there for a moment, like he was grounding himself before saying something difficult. Mom, can I ask you something? The way he said it made my chest tighten. Of course, I replied, shifting slightly to face him more fully. What's on your mind? He looked away, his gaze drifting toward the TV again. Though it was clear he wasn't really seeing it. It's kind of personal, he said. I didn't push. I just waited. There was a weight in the air now, something heavier than before. I could feel it settling between us, changing the moment into something more than just a quiet evening. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. You know how, when you get older, people start asking you all these questions? He began, like where you're going, what your plans are, where you see yourself in 5 years. I nodded gently. It's like everyone expects you to have it all figured out, he continued. His voice quieter now, but sometimes I don't even know where to start. Something in his words hit me deeply. I had watched him grow up, seen him become more independent, more confident, or at least that's what I thought. But hearing this, it made me realize there was so much he'd been carrying that I hadn't fully seen. I understand that, I said softly. Life doesn't come with a roadmap. You don't have to have everything figured out right away. He nodded slightly, but his expression didn't fully ease. It's not just that, he said after a pause. He hesitated again, and I could see it clearly now, the struggle to put something into words. Something bigger than just uncertainty about the future. I feel like... He started, then stopped. I waited, like I'm not living up to what everyone expects me to be. The words hung in the air, raw, honest, unexpected. I felt a quiet ache in my chest. This wasn't the confident, self-assured version of Ben I was used to seeing. This was something deeper, something more vulnerable. Ben, I said gently. But he kept going. I've been thinking a lot about my life, he continued. About the choices I've made. And I keep wondering if I'm on the right path. He finally looked at me then, and there it was. That fear, I don't want to disappoint anyone, he added. Especially you. That hit me harder than anything else. For a moment I didn't know what to say. Not because there weren't words, but because I wanted to choose the right ones. I had never wanted him to feel that way. Never wanted him to think his worth depended on meeting expectations. You could never disappoint me, I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. Not for being yourself. He looked down at his hands, quiet. I've always tried to make you proud, he admitted. And in that moment I realized something painful. Somewhere along the way, he had started carrying a weight that was never meant to be his. Ben, I said softly, reaching out and placing my hand over his. I've always been proud of you. Not because of what you do, but because of who you are. He didn't pull away. Instead, his thumb moved slightly against my hand, like he was holding on to the moment. I think I've been so focused on what everyone else wants, he said slowly, that I forgot to think about what I want. There it was, the truth he had been struggling to say, and hearing it, I felt both sadness and relief. Sadness that he had been carrying this alone. Relief that he was finally letting it out. You don't have to live for anyone else's expectations, I told him. The only person you need to make proud is yourself. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. I've been scared, he admitted. Scared of making the wrong choice. That's part of life, I said gently. Sometimes the wrong choices teach you the most important lessons. He let out a soft breath, and for the first time since he walked in, I saw something shift in him. Not a complete change, but a beginning. A small release of the weight he had been holding. I needed to hear that, he said quietly. We sat there for a while after that. No TV, no distractions. Just silence, but a different kind now. Not empty, not distant. Something fuller, something meaningful. For the first time in a long time, it felt like we were really seeing each other. Not just as mother and son, but as two people trying to understand life. Eventually he stood up, stretching slightly. Thanks, Mom, he said, his voice steadier now. I smiled. Anytime. He walked toward the door, then paused. Maybe we should do this more often, he added, glancing back with a small smile. I'd like that, I replied. And as he left the room, I sat there for a moment longer. The TV was still playing in the background, but everything felt different. That night wasn't planned. It wasn't special in any obvious way, but it was the kind of night that stays with you, the kind that quietly changes something inside you. And as I pulled the blanket closer around me, I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. Sometimes the most important moments in life don't come with warning. They just happen, softly, unexpectedly, and they change everything. The next few days didn't feel dramatically different on the surface. The house was still quiet. The same sunlight filtered through the windows each morning. The same routine unfolded, coffee in the kitchen, a glance at the clock, small tasks filling up the hours. If someone had looked from the outside, nothing would have seemed to change. But something had. It was subtle. A shift in the air, a softness in the silence, and most of all, a lingering presence of that night. I found myself thinking about it more than I expected. Not in a heavy way, not with worry, but with a kind of quiet reflection that stayed with me throughout the day. The way Ben had looked when he spoke, the hesitation in his voice, the honesty he had allowed himself to show. It wasn't just a conversation. It was a moment of trust. And I realized something that stayed with me long after. No matter how old he got, no matter how far life took him, there would always be parts of him that needed a place to land. A place where he didn't have to have the answers. A place where he could just be. A few days passed before I saw him again. It was late afternoon when I heard a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so for a brief second I hesitated. But when I opened it, there he was. Ben. This time there was no hesitation in his posture, no uncertainty in the way he stood. Hey, he said, a small, easy smile on his face. Hey, I replied, stepping aside. Come in. He walked in like he belonged there again, not like a visitor, not like someone passing through. He dropped his keys on the table, glanced around the living room for a second, then looked back at me. What are you up to? He asked casually. Nothing much, I said. Just the usual. He nodded, then moved toward the couch, sitting down in the same spot he had the other night. It didn't go unnoticed. I joined him after a moment, and again we fell into that familiar quiet. But this time, it didn't feel like distance. It felt like comfort. You've been thinking about what we talked about? I asked gently. He leaned back, resting his head against the couch. Yeah, he said after a moment. More than I thought I would. There was no tension in his voice this time, just honesty. I didn't realize how much I was holding in, he continued. It's like, once I said it out loud, it made everything clearer. I nodded. That's how it works sometimes, I said. Things don't feel real until you say them. He let out a small breath, almost like a quiet laugh. I think I've been running on autopilot for a while, he admitted. Just doing what I thought I was supposed to do. And now? I asked. He paused. Now I'm trying to figure out what I actually want, he said. Not what everyone else expects. That sentence stayed with me, because it wasn't just about decisions or plans, it was about identity. About stepping out of the shadow of expectations and learning how to stand on your own. That's not an easy thing to do, I said. I know, he replied, but I think it's necessary. We sat in silence again for a moment, but this time it felt different, like we were both sitting with the weight of that truth. I used to think being an adult meant having everything figured out, he said suddenly. Like there was a point where everything just clicked. I smiled softly. And now? He shook his head. Now I think it's the opposite, he said. I think it's about learning to be okay without having all the answers. I couldn't help but feel something warm settle in my chest at that. He was growing, not in the obvious ways, not just in age or responsibility, but in understanding. And that kind of growth, it changes everything. Over the next week, I noticed small things. The way he called more often. Not long conversations, not deep discussions every time, but simple check-ins. A quick, hey, how are you? A random comment about his day. Sometimes even just a few minutes of silence on the phone. Neither of us in a rush to hang up. It wasn't about the length of time. It was about intention. And then there were the visits. He started stopping by more frequently. Sometimes after work, sometimes in the evening. He'd sit down, grab a drink from the kitchen like he always used to, and we'd talk about everything and nothing at the same time. One evening, he walked in holding a takeaway bag. I brought food, he said, setting it on the table. I raised an eyebrow. That's new. He laughed. Yeah, well, figured I should start contributing. We sat down together, unpacking the containers. The familiar smell filling the room. It reminded me of the old days, those simple dinners when life felt less complicated. This is nice, I said quietly. Yeah, he agreed, it is. There was something unspoken in that moment. Not nostalgia exactly, but appreciation. For the past, for the present, and maybe even for the future. Later that night, after we finished eating, we moved back to the living room. The TV was on again, but like before, it wasn't the focus. Can I ask you something? He said suddenly. I turned to him. Always. He hesitated for a second, but not in the same way as before. This time it wasn't fear, it was thoughtfulness. Did you ever feel like this? He asked. Like you didn't know if you were on the right path? I smiled slightly. More times than I can count, I said. Really? Of course, I replied. Life isn't a straight line. Ben, it's messy, unpredictable, there. Are moments where you feel completely sure, and others where you question everything. He listened carefully. So what did you do? He asked. I leaned back slightly, thinking. I kept going, I said. Even when I wasn't sure. I made mistakes. I changed direction. I learned along the way. He nodded slowly. I guess I've been afraid of that part, he admitted. The mistakes. That's natural, I said. But mistakes aren't the end of the story. They're part of it. He looked down, thoughtful. I think I'm starting to understand that, he said quietly. And I believed him, because it wasn't just in his words. It was in the way he carried himself now. Less pressure, less urgency, more presence. A few days later, he called me early in the morning. I was in the kitchen, holding my coffee, watching the sunlight slowly fill the room when my phone buzzed. Hey, Mom, he said when I answered. Hey, I replied, smiling without realizing it. You're up early. Yeah, he said. I've been thinking. I leaned against the counter. That sounds serious. He chuckled lightly. Not serious, he said, just something I wanted to ask. Go on. There was a brief pause. Do you want to go to that diner we used to visit? He asked. The one near the lake. For a moment, I didn't respond. Not because I didn't want to, but because of what that place meant. So many memories lived there. Simple ones, quiet ones, important ones. I'd love that, I said finally. I'll pick you up around 10, he added. Okay. We hung up, and I stood there for a moment, holding my phone. It wasn't just an invitation. It was something more, a continuation of the conversation, of the connection we had started rebuilding, of something that had always been there, but had somehow gotten lost in the noise of life. And now, it was finding its way back. As I set my phone down and took another sip of coffee, I realized something that settled deeply within me. Growth doesn't always come from big, dramatic changes. Sometimes it comes from quiet conversations, from small moments, from the decision to show up again and again. And maybe that's what this was. Not a transformation, not an ending, but a beginning. A slow, steady step into something new, something honest, something real. And for the first time in a long while, it felt like we were both finally moving in the right direction. Saturday morning arrived with a softness that felt almost intentional. The sunlight slipped gently through the curtains, painting the walls in warm shades of gold. The house was still, but it wasn't the same kind of silence it used to be. It no longer felt empty. It felt calm. I stood in the kitchen, holding my cup of coffee, watching the steam rise slowly into the air. There was something different about this morning. Not just because of the plan to meet Ben, but because of what it represented. It wasn't just breakfast. It was time. Time chosen. Time shared. Time that wasn't rushed or forced. And somehow that made it more meaningful than anything else. By the time I heard the car pull up outside, I was ready. Not just dressed and prepared, but emotionally ready. Ready to step into whatever this next phase of our relationship was becoming. I opened the door before he even had the chance to knock. "Right on time," I said with a small smile. Ben grinned. "You know me." There was an ease in his expression that hadn't been there before. Something lighter, more grounded. We got into the car, and as he started the engine, the quiet between us felt familiar, but no longer uncertain. The drive was smooth, filled with casual conversation. He told me about work. Nothing extraordinary, just small things. A coworker who kept showing up late, a project that had taken longer than expected, a random moment that made him laugh during the week. And I listened, not just hearing him, but really listening, because I realized something recently. Sometimes it's not about giving advice or fixing things. Sometimes it's just about being present enough that the other person feels seen. "And then he just spilled coffee all over his desk," Ben said, shaking his head with a laugh. I smiled. "Sounds like something you would have done a few years ago." "Hey," he said, pretending to be offended. "I've grown since then." "Oh, I'm sure you have," I teased lightly. He laughed again, and for a moment it felt like no time had passed at all. But then again, it also felt like everything had changed. When we reached the diner, it looked exactly the same. Time hadn't touched it. The small parking lot, the faded sign, the large windows that reflected the lake just beyond it. Everything was just as I remembered. "Still standing," Ben said as he parked the car. "Some things don't change," I replied. We stepped inside, and instantly, a wave of familiarity washed over me. The soft hum of conversation, the clinking of dishes, the smell of coffee and warm food. It all wrapped around me, like a memory brought back to life. We walked to our usual booth by the window without even thinking about it. It was still there, waiting. We sat down, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. We just looked out at the lake, the sunlight dancing on the water's surface. "It's weird," Ben said quietly. "Feels like we were just here yesterday." I nodded. "Yeah, but also like a lifetime ago." A waitress came by, smiling warmly, and we ordered without needing to look at the menu. "Scrambled eggs and toast," I said. "Pancakes and bacon," Ben added. Some habits don't fade. As she walked away, Ben leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," he began. I turned my attention fully to him. "About what?" "About following my own path," he said. "About not living for other people's expectations." I nodded gently. "And?" He took a small breath. "I think I'm starting to understand it," he said. Not completely, but enough to feel different. There was sincerity in his voice, a quiet confidence. "What does that look like for you?" I asked. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "It means I'm not rushing anymore," he said. "I'm not trying to force myself into some version of success that doesn't feel right." I felt a sense of calm settle over me. "That sounds like a good place to start," I said. He nodded. "I used to think I needed a clear plan," he continued. "Like everything had to be mapped out. But now, I think it's okay to figure things out as I go." I smiled softly. "That's all any of us are really doing," I said. The food arrived then, interrupting the moment in the best possible way. Plates were set down in front of us, the warmth rising from them, grounding us in the present. We started eating, and for a while, the conversation drifted into lighter territory. But the depth of what had been said didn't disappear. It stayed there, quietly present. After a few minutes, Ben spoke again. "You know," he said, looking down at his plate, "I used to think being an adult meant having everything together." I waited. "But now I think it's more about asking the right questions," he continued, "and being okay with not having the answers yet." I felt something shift inside me when he said that. Not because it was surprising, but because it was true. You figured out something a lot of people spend their whole lives trying to understand, I said. He gave a small shrug. "I guess I just got tired of feeling lost," he admitted. I reached across the table, placing my hand over his for a moment. "Feeling lost doesn't mean you're doing something wrong," I said. "Sometimes it just means you're in the middle of finding yourself." He looked at me, and this time there was no hesitation, no doubt. "Just understanding. I think I am," he said quietly. We finished our meal slowly, not rushing through it. There was no need. Outside, the lake shimmered under the late morning sun, calm and steady. When we finally stood up to leave, I felt something settle within me. Not an ending, not a conclusion, but a quiet sense of peace. The drive back was even more relaxed than before. The conversation came easily, flowing between small talk and meaningful reflections without effort. At one point, Ben turned the radio on, and a familiar song played, one we used to listen to years ago. We didn't say anything about it. We didn't have to. Some things are understood without words. When we pulled up to the house, he turned off the engine but didn't move right away. "Thanks for coming with me," he said. I smiled. "Thank you for asking." He nodded, then glanced ahead for a moment before speaking again. "I think I'm going to take things slower from now on," he said. "Figure things out at my own pace." "That sounds like a good plan," I replied. He looked at me again, a small but genuine smile on his face. "I feel better," he admitted. "Lighter?" And I could see it, not just in his words, but in the way he carried himself, in the way he breathed, in the way he looked at the world around him. "Good," I said softly. He stepped out of the car, then walked around to my side as I opened the door. For a brief moment we stood there, no rush, no urgency. Just presence. "I'll see you soon," he said. "Soon," I agreed. He turned and walked back to his car, and as he drove away, I stood there for a moment longer, watching until he disappeared from view. Then I went inside. The house was quiet again. But this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt full. Full of conversations. Full of understanding. Full of something that had grown quietly over time without me even realizing it. I sat down in the living room, in the same spot as that night, and looked around. Everything was the same, and yet nothing was. Because something had changed, not in the world outside, but in the space between us. And maybe that's what life is really about. Not having everything figured out, not reaching some perfect destination, but growing, learning, letting go of expectations, and finding your way, step by step, moment by moment. Together, when you can. And on your own, when you must. I leaned back against the couch, pulling the blanket over my legs once again. The TV remained off. I didn't need it. Because for the first time in a long while, I wasn't looking for an escape. I was exactly where I needed to be.